What's going on, all you minties? Uncanny Omar here from Near Mint Condition, the home of collected editions. And today it gives me great pleasure to get to talk about one of my favorite comic book runs of all time. And one of my most wanted DC Omnis finally in my hand, the Question Omnibus by Dennis O'Neil and Dennis Cowan, Volume 1. So, let's get this party started. And welcome back, everybody. So here we have the Question Omnibus Volume 1. I love the fact that they used the cover to issue number 1. That's one of my favorite covers from this run. A couple of others I would have chosen too, but that's the classic look for it. Let's look at the spine here. The Question Omnibus by Dennis O'Neil and Dennis Cowan, Volume 1, DC Comics. I have to say, I like the design of this. I don't know how other people feel, but I like the frame look to the cover. I like this retro color they're using for the logo and the DC logo. I don't know. It definitely makes me think 80s because of it's almost like a neon color. And even the design that they have back here, very reminiscent of the 80s. And then, of course, this wonderful piece right here by Dennis Cowan. He'll find the answers or die trying. The book retailing for $99.99. Underneath the dust jacket, two other covers that I absolutely love. You have the one here from issue number 4, featuring the question. This is a little bit different. So you have the logo up there, the question mark, the Question Omnibus by Dennis O'Neil and Dennis Cowan. So compared to this that you get on the dust jacket, it is a little bit bigger there. But I love seeing Volume 1. Gives me hope for Volume 2. Not sure when, but hopefully one day. And then this image right here when he's buried in the sand. I think it was like a 2-issue story arc. These were great. This is from issue number 14, I believe. By the way, all the covers, for the most part, are penciled by Dennis Cowan and inked by Bill Sienkiewicz. So they have this unique look to them. Okay, but let's go ahead, crack this open, talk about the stories, check out this beautiful artwork, and talk about why this is one of the greatest runs at DC Comics, or comics in general, and give you a brief history as to who Vic Sage, the Question, is. Alright, let's get this open. You have some black end paper there, the big Question logo by Dennis O'Neil, Dennis Cowan, Volume 1. And here's another picture of Vic Sage. And one important thing I forgot to note, it does in very, very, very tiny font down there is ages 17 plus. So you can see the camera in that reflection. It explains a little bit more here. Let's go ahead and look at that. This talks about exactly what you're going to be looking at when opening the 17 plus book. This book contains language of racially offensive nature and might not be suitable for all age groups. But it was decided by the creative team and editors to keep it the same way that it's been printed in the past. So, just kind of giving you a heads up. I know some people cringe at that, but I don't see a damn problem with having a label saying, hey, this is a product of its time. That's fine, as long as you leave it intact. Don't change the wording. To me, it bothers me. But yeah, I think some people see those logos or those labels and immediately think, what's the point? Why? Well, because you have to explain it's a damn product of its time. That's why. And we moved on since then. You don't really see that in comics these days. But like I said, I don't mind a little sticker, tear it off, or a little blurb like that. As long as you leave the comic intact. It is a little bit hard to read now. That could be my old age when you're looking at the contents. But here you have the issues, where you're going to find them, what page you're going to find them. And here you can see that, unless otherwise noted, stories were all written by Dennis O'Neil, penciled by Dennis Cowan, inked by Rick Magyar, and colored by Tatiana Wood. And most of this at the time was lettered by Gaspar Saladino. But they do tell you, like, for example, like in the annuals, who else worked on the book. And there are a couple of fill-in issues here. So this collects the Question issues 1 through 27, Annual number 1 of the Question, Green Arrow number 1, and Detective Comics number 1. That's the big crossover. And all those have a parental advisory on them. But as you can see in the first few issues, they don't. I think it's not until issue 8 that you start seeing like parental guidance is highly recommended. Okay, so here we are introduced to the city of Hub City. And we're introduced to this mysterious man that wears a hat and a trench coat and has no face. The villains are kind of shocked whenever they're trying to attack him. He's trying to uncover some secrets. Here's his calling card. What the hell is this? Meanwhile, you have this lady back here who's not really fighting along with the bad guys. She's just kind of watching everybody fight the Question. And he leaves after getting some questions answered, because that's what he does. So he gets in his car. We see some gases come out of his car. And the mask starts peeling away. So the guy does have a face. And it turns out that he is an investigative reporter for a local news station. And that is KEBL TV. His bosses are like, where the hell is Vic Sage? So you can assume that this is Vic Sage. But it gets a little confusing here in a little bit. And Vic Sage comes in, talks about the evidence that he found, and about the corrupt government system. And that's the beginning of issue number 1. So later we see Vic. He has this love affair, if you will, with this lady named Myra. He doesn't treat her well. He's kind of a little bit of a loner, a little bit of a badass. And this is all through the first issue. Then we see him talking to this older gentleman right here that is kind of helping him with his mask and his issues. Vic is talking about how his mask is falling off in the last battle. He needs help just keeping it on. And the older gentleman is like, hey, it could be because you're smoking cigarettes, that could be having a chemical side effect. So Vic is like, okay, I'll try to stop smoking. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about why this book is so good. I know it seems like your average crime story here. It seems like your gritty type of scenery that we've seen in the past. So let's get to the ending. So, as it turns out, Vic goes back and investigates these people that he ran into earlier. However, this time, the lady that he saw at the very beginning that wasn't interfering with the fight steps in and kicks the living crap out of him. Now, it's not just her, but all her goons start beating the crap out of him with crowbars, the end of the butt of the gun, and they end up shooting his head and throwing him in the river, leaving him for dead. That's the first issue where your main character just goes and investigates. Seems kind of like a badass. Then gets his ass kicked by this lady who later on later on it turns out that is Lady Shiva, of course, one of Batman's greatest nemesis. And rightly so, he should get his ass kicked. But that's so strange to see a hero just get killed in the first issue. Then in the second issue, he is kind of reborn. And because Lady Shiva pulled him out of the water and kind of revived him and brought him to get trained by Richard Dragon. And now Richard Dragon is one of the greatest martial artists at DC Comics. And he's kind of not just teaching him martial arts, but also the Zen philosophy. So Vic Sage is now missing from his city, Hub City. One of my favorite moments in this book right here, though, is when, during his phase of training, when he's knocked down, when he believes he's dead in issue number 2, he has this daydream of Batman, where him and Batman are teaming up. But then Batman really appears. And Batman gives him this whole speech about, you can't have two personas. This superhero life really is about just focusing on that and that alone. You can't he tells him you can't half-ass it. It's got to be full-time. Your need, your obsession, the engine that drives you. It's got to be who you are. Damn, Dennis O'Neil's Batman, still one of the greatest written comic book characters. But yeah, this is where he gets his training. You get to find out exactly why Lady Shiva pulls him out of the water, why she decides to resurrect him. And he goes back to his corrupt city. He tries to go back to Myra. However, we find out Myra, since some time has passed, is now married to an alcoholic mayor. So they still have those issues. Now, after training, he still has his persona of the Question and his Vic Sage persona of an investigative reporter. because by using both of those, he can stop these corrupted government that he believes is happening in his own city. So he's a little bit different than, say, Batman or Green Arrow, where they're stopping, petty thieves or drug dealers. I mean, he still does that, but he is more about stopping the corrupt system from within. So there's less of him like stopping people that are just snatching purses at night and things like that. And he's a little more violent and a little more vicious than those characters I said, which is kind of weird to talk about. And what I'm doing right now is showcasing this beautiful, badass artwork by Dennis Cowan. Now it's saying that it's suggested for mature readers as of issue number 8. And it will do that from time to time. Not every issue has mature themes, but as of issue 8, I remember that happening. So that's pretty much the story of Vic Sage. And when I said that he was a little bit confusing, like he has a little bit of a confusing background, I was mainly talking about like when you're introduced to him, he goes by Vic Sage, but people keep calling him Charles Victor Zass. And if you hadn't read the previous run that preceded this, the Steve Ditko stuff, you might be a little bit confused, but it all gets explained. He tells, Aristotle wrote her, like, hey, I go by Victor Sage now. I'm no longer Charles Victor Zass. That's not to be confused with the Batman villain either. Now, I mentioned Aristotle wrote her, and that's kind of the gentleman that helped him build this Question persona. He went to him seeking advice and peace because he was kind of a violent kid. He grew up in an orphanage, was abused there, left the orphanage, and became a reporter in Hub City. So it's the city he grew up in. It's the city that he, just refuses to leave. So I mentioned Steve Ditko, and the Question has a very interesting history. He started off being a Charleston character. So it was published by the Charleston Comics, and along with a few other characters like Captain Atom and Blue Beetle, DC bought the rights to those characters and started, I think it was in the early 80s when they bought them, and then started putting them in during Crisis on Infinite Earths. As a matter of fact, the first DC appearance that you see of the Question was in Crisis on Infinite Earths. So the character's history was rewritten a little bit. So this series kicks off in 1987, and it's kind of retelling the origin of the character, but not really tweaking it a lot. Now, if you know about the history of how they were originally going to bring in those characters to the DC universe, that was where Watchmen came from. So Watchmen was a book that Alan Moore was going to be working on. It was supposed to introduce Blue Beetle, Captain Atom, the Question into the DC universe, but it was thought by editors that it was just too good. And I mean, I've heard both sides of the story too, that it was Alan Moore's decision to just make it its own thing, and then the editors thought, you know what, this is too good of a story, let's just make it its own thing. So Blue Beetle, for example, became the Owl, and then this gentleman right here, no, not that guy, this guy, the Question became Rorschach. And one of my favorite issues in here, it's issue number, I think it's 17, I just reread this last week. Yes, this issue right here, where you have Vic Sage traveling, he's on an airplane, and he ends up reading a Watchmen comic. And he's like, oh yeah, this is a pretty gritty comic book. It's not like the stuff I used to read. But he's obsessed with the character of Rorschach, who's like giving him ideas. Well, maybe I should become a little more violent like that. But instead he gets his ass kicked. And he's like, man, Rorschach would not be happy with me. He'd be laughing at me right now. And then by the end of this storyline, which leads into the Green Arrow team up, he's pretty much like, man, Rorschach sucks. Screw that guy. But I love that because it's very meta. It understands what it is. I've always loved that issue. And I read these as a stack of comics that my buddy Shaka gave me. He thought highly of these series, and I was always an X-Men guy, so when I worked at the comic book store, he came in with this big stack of like 80s comics. A lot of DC stuff that he wanted me to get into. This is one of the non-Dennis Cowan issues, I believe. Yeah, this is the Batman Annual. So there is a big crossover between Batman and Green Arrow back here. It's called Fables. It's a 3-parter. And also has mature content, mainly for the language, I will say, and a little bit of the violence. But really, one of the highest selling points, in this particular series is also the Dennis Cowan artwork. I'm just glad that we finally have it in a big, oversized format. It's freaking stunning and detailed, and the city just looks dirty and gritty and more corrupt than it's ever looked. And of course, the other big thing with Dennis's artwork is just so easy to follow. It's detailed, yet the fight sequences are easy to follow. They're beautiful storyboards that you would use in a movie. Just happens to have beautiful amount of details. I love the flow of his panels. And of course, this is long before the milestone era that he was drawing that I think most people think of. But yeah, he is a phenomenal artist. Easy to follow panels. And finally available in this oversized format that it rightly belongs. Look at that. And honestly, just looking at those details there kind of reminds me of Todd McFarlane. Like the amount of cross-hatching that he used back in the 80s. Loved it. Easy to follow panels. I will say, if you can't stomach animals being hurt, maybe want to skip this book. Just I forgot about that part. I always like to tell people that when doing overviews of books, if I can remember. Forget about that. But yeah, this is the kind of artwork to expect in this book. Now, there is enough material, of course, for a volume 2. There were a couple quarterly issues that came out that were bigger. There were second annual. Actually, I'm going to do a video on my most wanted continuing DC Omnis. And I've mapped them out, so I'll be talking about that in a future video. I hope this book sells enough that DC says, hey, let's go ahead and release the volume 2. Now, oh yeah, this is Volk. The story, this reminds me of Wolverine. I think it's supposed to be. It's about this character named Volk who's in touch with his animal self. And I like the ending of this. That's kind of a spoiler, but I like the ending of this issue. But I like the ending because of what Vic is wearing at the end when he makes the promise to go to this tree. When you read it, you'll see what I mean. Now, the coolest thing about this collection, and I don't know how I feel about where it's collected, but all the letter pages are back here. Now, this is the answer. This is where pretty much Dennis O'Neil took the time to add additional reads to your reading experience of the question. This is where he suggested some books to read on philosophy, Eastern philosophy. I thought this was cool. And yes, these were all found in the single issues, but they're all the way in the back here. I wish it was collected after each issue, and I understand that you don't want to, take apart the story. This is why Jonathan Hickman loves putting his covers on the back. But I kind of like the idea of the letter pages being with each of the issues at the end of each issue. Maybe I'm just used to it because that's the way that Marvel did it. And I'm just glad that DC started doing this. Maybe this gives me some hope that they'll start doing it for future Omnis, because they really don't put letter pages in their omnibus collections. Now, this book has 952 pages. Let's see if there's a couple of extras, like pretty much house ads back here. This house ad right here for the Question's gorgeous piece, and then this right here for the Fables crossover. 952 pages. Let's take a look at this binding. You have sewn binding, and there's that big, beautiful eye. This is the same paper they've been using in the past. This is actually, you know what? It feels a little bit thicker than what they use for the 100 Bullets Volume 2. But it, lays over really nice towards the front and the back. There's not that many spread pages in here. But because of the weight of this right here, the end paper tends to want to close on you. But believe me, it gets better with time. And then how it lays over in the back. But that's it. That, as they say, is that. If you're interested in purchasing this book, don't forget to check out our sponsor, cheapgraphicnovels.com, your online home for graphic novels and collected editions up to 50% off cover price. They have excellent shipping and prompt and helpful service. Check out their bargain deals for up to 90% off cover price. And don't forget that CGN also takes pre-orders. That way you don't miss out on the hottest releases. And they are currently running a special promotion for you minties. If you're a first-time customer, after receiving your order confirmation email, reply back to that email and let them know Near Mint Condition sent you their way. They will then apply a free shipping promotional credit to your next order in the US. Cheap Graphic Novels, your source for the hottest books with the kind of deep discount, quality shipping, and customer service that will keep you coming back for more. And that was the content, the page count, and build of this omnibus. Let me know in the comments down below if you are picking this up, if you have those old trades, now you can get rid of them if you're upgrading. If you've never read the question, or you're only familiar with the question from the 52 or New 52 era, or Rebirth, or the Justice League Unlimited series, I strongly suggest at least trying to read the first 6 issues, see if it's for you. I believe it is now available digitally, is what some of my viewers told me. Maybe check it out that way. But yes, finally in my hand is Dennis O'Neil and Dennis Cowan's The Question. If you have any questions, dad joke for the week, I swear, that's it. If you have any questions, leave them down below, comments down below. Everyone stay healthy and safe out there. Much love.